Welcome to another episode of How I Discovered My Gift with yours truly, David D. Simons. I'm honored and delighted and excited to dig into this entrepreneur's story today. Alison Etinoff, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, David. Thank you for having me.
It's truly an honor. It's truly an honor. I want to give you all a background on Alison. She has a remarkable story, a remarkable background that you're going to all learn. I got a few glimpses, but I know we're going to go deeper today. So Alison Etinoff is an entrepreneur. She's most notably known as the founder and president of Etinoff Incorporated with over 250 employees. That was not a typo. Over 250 employees. She's built a multi-million-dollar empire through her various endeavors. She comes from humble beginnings, born in the Bronx, New York, and raised in Newark, New Jersey during her adolescent years and Maplewood, New Jersey during her teen years. Christ found her heart at a young age of 4. Can you believe that? We're going to dig into that. And manifested a small miracle during a time of trouble, which changed the trajectory of her life. She's here today to share her story of faith, trials, and victory. Again, welcome to the show, Alison.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me.
No problem. No problem. So, we got to start in your childhood. So take us through that. We got to hear the story about this miracle, and then we'll go on from there.
So, as you mentioned earlier, I was born in the Bronx. I have very little, if any, recollection of living in the Bronx, New York. My parents are both from the islands. My mother is from St. Vincent, and my father's from Antigua. Nice. And, I think I was about 1 or so when we decided to move over to Newark, New Jersey. We lived in Ivy Hill for the first 3-4 years of my life. And church was a very major part of my life. We probably was at church 7 days a week. No exaggeration. Just, participating. We were very active in church. I participated in a lot of the youth activities there. My mom was our youth leader at my church growing up. And everything just seemed perfect. It seemed great. I mean, but you notice things. You notice little things, right? I know that we didn't live in the nice homes that we see on TV. We lived in Ivy Hill, which was a projects. And, things would happen, but we never experienced it. I never knew it to be like a bad place. I have a lot of great memories living there. We would do a lot of walking. We would walk to the supermarket to pick up our groceries and the whole bit. But like I said before, church was like a major part of my life. I loved our, Christian group where we would do our studies and studying and learning about the Bible stories. Noah's Ark was one of my favorite stories that we would learn. Okay. And, but like I said, you notice things, right? You notice like a cadence or a pattern in your life, especially when things are just beginning. And I noticed that me and my mom would go to church, but my dad wasn't coming with us. He'd be watching football. And I never had any memories of my parents having any problems. But all of a sudden one day, my uncle came and took me on a long journey to Canada. And, it was like, you're going to be back soon. I don't know if I just thought it was a vacation. I didn't know what to think about it. But it took us about 2 days to head up to Winnipeg, Canada, where I stayed with my aunt for about a year. Wow. About a year. Yeah. So,
how old were you at that time?
I was 4 years old at that point.
Oh, wow. You remember 4. I cannot remember 4.
Oh, yes. Well, you know what it is? When you have a traumatic event or a traumatic experience at a young age, that will stick with you. Mm. So I have very vivid memories at 4. And I think I would describe myself as shy, very, very shy. A lot of things, totally, and of course, at 4 years old, a lot of things go over your head. You have no true conception of life and everything
Mm.
that life embodies. But um, moved up to Canada, and I love my cousins dearly, but they were in trouble. They were in a very abusive situation there.
Mm.
And my aunt, I guess, extended the service to my mom that she would help me while while her and my dad were separating. I had no understanding of what was happening during this time.
Mm.
Um, and the abuse began. I can't describe it any other way.
Mm.
Um, my cousins were, you know, I'm tempted to use the word disciplined, but it's not discipline. It was abused regularly,
Wow.
and they were constantly looking for an out. And I was the new. It was almost like being hazed, right?
Mm.
I was the new one that came in, and especially my youngest cousin, the one that's closer to me in age. She's about 4 years older than me. Um, everything was I didn't do it, she did it. You know, and I remember one time my aunt beat me so bad, my back was black and blue. And I remember my cousins surrounding me like, we will never allow her to touch you again.
Wow.
Um, our situation there was very strange. Like we would wake up, 4:30 in the morning for worship, and we would come downstairs to have worship, but there was no love there.
Wow.
Um, we would be there singing songs. We would, be forced to learn these Bible scriptures,
Yeah.
but there was no connection between the scriptures that we were learning and the life that we were living.
Wow.
You know, we attended church regularly. My aunt had her friends. In hindsight now, I think of them as like cronies. They would come and they would kind of force us to stay up and pray all night long, in the living room.
As
I
kids.
think my aunt at the time, to be honest with you, I think she was really going through something. I think she was going through a divorce, and I think God is all she had to hold on to. And here she is with three kids of her own and me a fourth to feed and to take care of. And she just lost it.
Mm.
She was off her rocker.
Wow.
She's come later in life. She's come to learn. Um, I don't think she fully understands. I think she only understands because of the relationship that she's had to fight for her children, But I'm going too far. I'm like fast forwarding too much in the story. But ultimately, it was a really terrible existence.
Mm.
Um, One to which has bled through even to in towards our adult years. She has a very strained relationship with her children. Um,
Goodness.
and it's something that her and I have discussed throughout the years. But let me tell you about the story. So, as I mentioned to you before,
Mm.
we went to church, 6, 7 times a week. Like I said, we were very, very active in church, and and going down there and experiencing what I experienced, I did get opportunities to talk to my mother.
Mm.
And I had to be very careful with the words that I would say because my aunt would be in the room when I was speaking to her,
Wow.
and she would send me down gifts. So my birthday came about, and my father sent me a bike. That was the first time that I had received something from him because I hadn't heard from him at all while I was there. So I was so excited, and Canada has very long winters. So by the time I was able to ride my bike, it was probably well into, June, July. And I was, teaching myself to learn to ride my bike. And I fell off my bike. Um, and I pretty much bruised my hand really badly and my knee, like I was bleeding. And my aunt was the type where she would discipline, abuse, beat for any reason whatsoever.
Jeez.
And I ran in the house, and washed my hands, and I wrapped them up with toilet paper. I don't know what I was trying to do. I
Mm.
just know I was trying to be invisible, right? And I just said a quick prayer, and I was just like, Lord, help, like the tears, the welding. Like, even now I'm talking to you about it, I can feel that feeling that I felt in attempts to, I was begging God to please help me, because I knew as soon as she came home that that would be her first level of recourse. And I know it sounds so strange, but it was just how life was, right?
Mm.
If you weren't perfect, if you weren't behaving in the right way, or if you
Yeah.
had done something even to your own detriment, like fall off your bike, because I sure enough, I scraped my hand really, really bad, and my leg. So I wrapped my arm up with some toilet paper, and I went to my bed, and I said a prayer, and I just asked God to help me. I was, I think at that point I was 5 years old, because I was 4 when I went down there. And I remember having my fifth birthday
Yeah.
there. And I went to sleep, a crying child,
Yeah.
um, traumatized. I went to sleep. And while I was asleep, it must have rained. But by the time I woke up, I promise you not, my left hand was just as clean as my right hand.
Mm. Mm.
And the bruises that I had on my leg had all disappeared.
Wow.
And I went to the window, and I went on my knees, and I prayed, and I thanked God for what he did for me, because that was something that I didn't have to explain. I didn't have to go through any drama. And for the first time, I knew that the stories that I learned at church were real. And
Wow.
when I finished my prayer in the window, I opened my eyes, and I looked up, and I saw a rainbow.
Wow.
And that just cemented to me that God is walking with me,
Mm.
and even till now, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me.
Right.
That is like my mantra for my
Right.
life, right? Because he has shown me in miracle form that he hears the prayer of the young.
Yes.
So, you go through life, but that ultimately was like a turning point for me.
Mm.
And not too long after that, it must have been a couple of weeks after that,
Yeah.
I my prayer always was, when I was there, that I can come back home.
Mm.
That was my prayer. And
Yeah.
when I saw the rainbow, and when he healed my hands, I felt like he was hearing my prayer, my
Yeah.
constant request to come home. And within weeks after that, I was home. Home was
Mm.
very different. Home was a
Wow.
very different place, but the lesson that I learned through that experience is never, ever let allow anyone to do something to you, because that would have never happened had my parents been, around, or
Yeah.
in my situation. So that experience at a very young age actually took me from being introverted to extroverted.
Wow.
It really taught me to speak up for myself, and to be an advocate for myself.
Wow.
Um, and it's so funny. Not that I ever forgot this story, but when I was in college doing my grad work, I was in this class. I can't even remember the name of the class, but it was like understanding people and process. And part of that was looking into yourself, and looking into major events that happen in your life that,
Yeah.
alter the trajectory of your life as you knew it.
Mm.
And one of the things that my mom mentioned to me was this story. She said, this has changed the trajectory of your life. I couldn't share that with the class, right?
Yeah.
We had to do
Yeah.
like interview style with people that knew
Understood.
us very well. And that
Yeah.
was one of the items that came up.
Wow.
But ultimately, it changed the trajectory of my life, allowed me to become an advocate for myself. And um, I have attributed a term to it, um,
Mm.
which
Yeah.
is going to be the founding of my new project that I have coming up, because it has happened to me so many times in my life,
Mm-hmm.
to where now I had to put a sound to it,
Hmm.
or a name to it. So ultimately, the name of my new ministry that I'll be, sharing with the world very soon. Pretty much, I believe our first episode on YouTube will be August 15th. It is called the Woosh Effect.
Oh, I love it.
Whoosh, right?
Yes. Yeah.
It's a lot of people are not, keen to the Holy Spirit and the workings of the Holy Spirit, but when He works to the believer, you feel something just very familiar coming on, right?
Right.
And it's just this whooshful experience. It's
Mm.
this thing that it happens in the little things. It even happens at times where at a young age of 4 years old, I didn't understand it. But from the time God healed me, my whole disposition changed. The
Mm.
situation that I was in was no longer something for me to fear,
Yeah.
right? It was that I knew God heard me and
Yep.
I knew what was coming
Mm.
was going to be better than the situation that I was in.
Yeah.
And I have experienced this at 4 years old. I have experienced this at 10, at 12, at 15. Even my experience when I went to college, my grades weren't the greatest. Um, my mom got married, and that was an abusive situation, not a physically abusive, but definitely a verbal and emotionally abusive relationship.
Mm.
And, you know, I was a byproduct of something that was not made in love between the two of them.
Yeah.
So I received a lot of backlash from there. At the age of 12, I was working. I had a job.
Well, goodness. Where were you working? What were you doing?
I was actually working as I used to stuff envelopes. I won't put the name of the business on blast,
Mm-hmm.
but my mother at the time was a manager there. And I guess she needed some childcare. So she brought me along, and I would come and I would stuff envelopes. Like during their billing season, I would come, I would stuff envelopes. And then at the age of 13, she would allow me to answer phones. I was an operator from the
Wow.
time I was 13 until the time I was 18.
Wow.
Yes. So all throughout my high school years, those pagers, those alphanumeric pagers. So you would
Yeah.
call into the line. I was that person on the other line sending out those messages. So the skills that I learned actually doing that, I learned to type. I learned to spell really good and really fast.
Wow.
Um, and getting them out. And I worked that job for 5 years. And in the back of my mind, it was ultimately I gave my mom my entire paycheck. I wanted to empower my mom to get out of her situation.
Wow. Wow. It's love.
And I'd had several discussions with her, and but all things in God's timing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because I'd had several prayers about that, and I just had to let it go. When you're in an abusive type of situation, you don't know when it's going to get or if it's going to get physical.
Right.
So, I stayed in a mode of prayer with that, and God delivered my mom from that. And that was well after, they were married for over 25 years.
Wow.
So, it, you know, but God has shown himself consistently as like this thread throughout my life of like deliverance, right?
Mm.
And one thing he has taught me is if God is going to be good for me, he's going to be good for you too, right?
Right.
You have to want to be delivered. You have to want to break through.
Wow. It's like
So,
there's this, like you said, this thread through your life. Like how, I mean, it's like you couldn't have planned any of those things. Like they're just, and that's childhood, right? Your parents are taking care of you, and your guardians are taking care of you, and it's like God allowed you to be in these positions to kind of elevate you to where it's like I think of Joseph, right? Just
oh
like
yeah.
how like it seems yeah, that seems really bad. You going through the abuse at 4, that's horrible. Like, I can't imagine. Like, I see nieces and nephews that are that were that young. I can't imagine doing that to a child of that age, or even older. But you like, it's like God allowed these things, and it was to take you from a pit to literally a palace, right? In what you're
Sure.
doing. um, so if you could speak about that now, this acceleration, this trend. Okay, so you're stacking skills in high school, right? Where most people are just reading or trying to read some books that the teachers give us, but we're not really reading them. You're stacking real life world skills. How did that give you an advantage in the marketplace? How did, like, talk to me about like that, and then how did that lead to college and eventually to business?
So, and this is one thing, especially when we met the last time, that I could never tell my story without even strangers, believers, unbelievers. Look, you could believe what you want to believe, right? But I cannot tell my story without talking about how I know God was working
Mm,
through my life, and a lot of the things that He has led me through. Um, the skill stacking, I just wanted to help my mom. I
wow.
wasn't even thinking about, oh, I'm doing this. I was like, Mom, just give me $100 out of my check, and all the rest, you can keep the rest. And that was very helpful for my mom,
Wow.
because once she, we pretty much worked that business until Pagers died, right? Pagers died around the time I was around 18 years old. And the business that bought out the company that she was working for, when they hired her, the way that my paycheck was done is it was brushed off on my mom's income, and my mom would pay me out of her check.
Mm,
So, but what that did was that allowed her to come from a place of strength in negotiations, right? Which ultimately led her to be able to go out on her own, right?
nice,
To be able to support herself.
nice.
So the ultimate end eventually happened, to where she was able to financially support herself and to be out on her own and
Hmm.
out of the situation that she was in.
Beautiful.
So I wasn't thinking of it like I'm developing or building skills.
Mm,
Um, when it came time for me to graduate, I barely graduated from college. I don't. I'm almost ashamed to say I think I had like a 2.5 GPA. My focus was not on school at all. My
mm,
focus was on helping my family, helping my mother, right? For the last couple of years in high school, I lived with my dad, but I still continued to work at the same location. Literally, I lived right around the corner from my mom. Like, I could look out my window and see where my mom was.
wow.
So that was like an interesting situation. But ultimately, I wasn't thinking of it like that. So I was super active in the church, though, and I was attending a church gathering. I believe it was like a church barbecue, and a first lady from another church. We had like families of churches,
Yeah.
and we would have these group like events. And she knew I was a youth leader at my church. And she came to me and she sat me down and she said, now, mind you, this is in August. School starts September, 5th,
Yeah.
somewhere around there. And she sits me down and she says, what are you doing? Like, what do you want to do? What are your plans? Are you going to school? Are
Yeah.
you? And I said, I would love to go to school, but I'm not sure that's in the works for me. Right? I
Mm,
said I might go to the army. I might, I felt strongly in my heart that school was the next step for me,
yeah.
but I was not sure that that's what God wanted for me, simply
Mm,
because I couldn't see it. Right? Here I am with a 2.5 GPA. I might
yeah.
have even had like a 2.4, but however,
Mm,
and she leaned over to me. She was a counselor for Kane University.
Yeah.
And she leaned over to me and she said, "This is where my office is. Meet me on Monday."
Hmm.
And I went into the office, and for about 2 to 3 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
I went into that office every single day, filling out paperwork, doing, testing. And once again, it's like that whoosh, right? Even though I was in the midst of a situation that was dire, right? And one
Mm.
arguably would say that I waited to the last minute, or God waited to the last minute. Well, I'm here
Yeah.
to say and just share with folks in general, right? God is always on time.
Mm.
Even even in the entire situation with Noah in the ark. Noah had to be in the ark for 7 days before the rain started.
Mm.
Moses had to walk into the water. If you look at the Bible scripture clearly, he walked into the water before the water began to part.
Mm.
God unveiling this miracle for me was just another eye-opening opportunity.
Yeah.
And just the fact that this woman cared for me so much and put her reputation on the line for me,
Wow.
I thought was amazing.
Mm.
Um, and I said to myself in my heart, and my prayer to God was, "Lord, help me to never let her down."
Wow.
That was my hope and that was my prayer.
Wow.
Um, my first year, I was playing a lot of spades in the game room. I used to like to hang out with the boys, and we used to play pool and play spades, and I would probably work right. I'd play games right up until you know right up until class started. I was like, "Look, guys, I gotta go." They're like, "Man, this game is getting hot," And unfortunately, a lot of them brothers did not make it through. Um,
Oh.
but I noticed in the distance some
Mhm.
students that would wear suits,
Yeah.
and they just appeared to be everywhere and engaged in the community. And I
Yeah.
remember one day just thinking to myself, I want to be one of them. I want to
Hmm.
be like one of them, you
Yeah.
know? And the very next year, I ran for as a student rep, which is like the lowest. Um, it was the lowest position in our student government, and
Yeah.
I didn't win. So I felt a little bit of ways about that, but it didn't deter me, right?
Yep.
I kept I started my college career, I guess you could say, and I got really active. And the subsequent year, it was my junior sophomore year ish. Because I think I ran during the end of my freshman year for that,
Yeah.
and my sophomore year I ran as president of our Pan African Student Union. A lot of other colleges call it BSU,
Yeah.
and I won. I won the position,
Wow.
and that was like another whoosh effect
Mm.
because I put everything that I knew and loved in the church
Mm.
into my PESU. And for those who are out there, PESU, that was like our little thing. We didn't have a lot of fraternities and sororities, but that
Ah.
was our group of love.
Yeah.
And I felt like we dominated. We had a lot of great, wonderful opportunities, experiences there, and it really sharpened my tool. Talk about sharpening your toolbox.
Lovely.
The subsequent year I not graduated. The subsequent year I ran for VP of our student government and won that position. So at
Mm.
that point I was vice president of all of our groups within
Mhm.
the college. So that allowed me a great platform of visibility. Majority of my friends, colleagues that I worked with during that time, they're business owners, they're motivational speakers, they're all around the world. And you could imagine having that high and graduating on that high and then starting in the world, right?
Mm.
It's like you're starting from scratch, you're starting all over again,
Right.
but you know that there's something more for you at that point because
Right.
you know that you have experienced something major, right?
Yep.
Um, in our existence, our organization that we had was very unique. We used to cut checks. We had bank accounts. We would hire and fire vendors. So
What?
having that experience
Yeah.
and then going into the real world and having someone try to give you a title,
Mm.
that was problematic for me.
Mm.
That was a challenge for me.
It,
Um, but
it's like
I
I just want to hit at something. It seems like just hearing your story, every moment God was like preparing you for what's. I don't even know the rest. We're gonna hear the rest of the story, but it's like He kept preparing you for beyond where you were going. Like I go back to even as a child, right? Like as much as it was a bad environment at your aunt's house, whether and the reason for your aunt's devotion to God in one way from and not action in another way, but that was an atmosphere. I believe I'm just speculating on this based on what you shared, but like that was an atmosphere for creating miracles. You were in worship, you were in devotion to God at a young age and invited Him in, and He heard the sincerity of your prayer. And so it's like that was preparation for the miracle. And then you go to high school, you're just trying to help your mom, but you're stacking in the byproduct, you're stacking skill sets, and that's preparation for life that and school and other things. And I'm sure that helped and aided you in PESU and how you went there, and you're there running an organization like a organization.
Yes.
And that's going to prepare you for where we're going next. So I just want to put that in there. I did a trend I see in your life from what you're sharing.
One thing I'm so grateful for, even looking back to my experience when I was 4 years old, I believe truly in my heart that God needed to do that miracle for me
Mm-hmm.
because everything that I was experiencing at that time was telling me this is not the way.
Mm.
Do you see what I mean? It was telling me that this is
Oh.
all. I feel like he was like, let me show you I am real.
Mm.
Everything that you're learning is real, but when it's shown through a distorted glass, right? And too
Mm.
often, even in our church settings,
Yeah.
there's so many of us that misrepresent God
Sadly.
and misrepresent his intent for his people. You and I
Mm-hmm.
have the same coach,
Mm-hmm.
right?
That's right. That's right.
And we're learning and growing in that poverty in and of itself is
Yeah.
not for God's people.
I
All
agree.
right. And
100%.
and the Bible talks about like you will be the head and not the tail.
Mm-hmm.
That space is reserved for you. It's reserved for your purpose,
Right.
right? Um
100%.
and I believe I'm trying to think about the scripture in Romans 8:28. I believe it is. And it says all things work to good for them that love the Lord and that are called according to not your purpose,
His
but
purpose.
his purpose. Right? So when you begin to embrace your God given purpose, it's almost like it's that whoosh. It's like a highway,
Mm-hmm.
right? You no longer have to be in the valley of the shadow of death. You no
Right.
longer have to be fearful, right? It's like you have to fight through all of those things, but when you get on God's way, when you get on God's highway, He will 10x you in a minute.
That's
And let
right.
me tell you, well, this is me fast forwarding again, right?
Yeah.
Um, the experiences I have had has shown me what God's will was for my life.
Mm.
And it was unfortunate because I could no longer be content with what I perceived to be as average. I
Mm.
was happy that I had a job,
Mm-hmm.
right? But that's not God's standard for
Mm-hmm.
us. Um, we are kings and queens because He is the King of kings.
That's right.
He's not the king of peasants,
That's right.
right?
100%.
So, and He has given us our domain. to operate in, which is a piece of him. And he's given each and every single one of us a piece of him, right?
Right.
So that we can operate and be the king and queens of our thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, and until you have found that thing in your life,
Right.
you will not be okay.
Mm-hmm.
You'll
Yeah,
always be searching for the next thing,
for sure.
right? And too often we tend to settle for less, just thinking, well, heaven is my home and this is just kind of our dwelling place. But the reality is he has called his people to be, like I said before, the head and not the tail. He
Yeah.
has called us to lead and to be examples to the world, to be ambassadors,
That's
right?
right. That's right.
Ambassadors are people who are strategically placed around the world to
Mm-hmm.
represent their homeland.
For sure.
We are kings and queens put here to represent our homeland.
Mm-hmm.
Our homeland, and he talks about this all in the Beatitudes and Matthew about kingdom culture,
Right. For
right?
sure.
And how we ought to have our exchanges with one another.
Mm-hmm.
So it always bothered me um, that most of there was very few praise reports, or the praise reports were, in my opinion, lacking. Right? I,
Mm-hmm.
I praise the Lord. I was able to pay my light bill this month. Right? I was able to, and look, the truth is, God will bless you to where you think He can lead you.
You got to say that again, Allison. That's
God
that's
will
good.
bless you to where you think He could lead you. So if you're God and all He can do is keep the lights on, then that's what you're gonna get.
Mm. Mm. So take us through where did that belief pattern shift for you? Like how did that like take us through, right? You graduate, you're working in the world and the real world now. You have quite a like by the time you graduated, you probably had like 10 years of experience of business
I
experience. Like
I really felt that way.
yeah.
I managed over $1 million budget. Each we had a series. Majority of my I was the VP of funded groups. So these are groups that dance, and you'd have we had like a Haitian group. We had the Latin group. We
Yeah.
had so we had over 30 or 40 groups. Each one had a budget, and all of those budgets were ran through me.
Wow.
So with that was like the greatest program ever, and our school no longer does it. My alma mater no longer has that program because they felt, I think in large part, that we had too much power, because
Mm.
we did. We hired vendors and we fired vendors. We had
Wow.
a contract with the university to put on programming for the university.
Mm.
So when I left from that and started my first job,
What was your first job, by the way?
my first job, I was a fleet manager for Caterpillar.
Okay.
And I enjoyed that. I actually revolutionized the job. And I remember meeting with a lot of colleagues over lunch, and they would say, "This is too small for you. This
Mm.
pond that you're in is too small for you."
Wow.
And I didn't know at the time what I was exuding, saying, doing.
Hmm.
A lot of the reporting that I was doing, unfortunately, quite a few people got let go because they were stealing from the company. And the reporting that I had done had brought a lot of this to light,
Mm.
But all of this kind of stemmed back to the experience that I had in college.
Mm.
To be honest with you, it wasn't. Kane University is a wonderful place.
Hmm.
But I'm more grateful for the extracurricular activities
Yeah.
than I am for the actual schooling itself. I
Yeah.
learned more through all the extracurricular, and that's a plus to anybody,
Yeah.
because my experience in student org, not only did it take care of my tuition costs, which
Mm.
was like a major thing for me,
Hmm.
and I'm terrible at storytelling, but I have to go back and tell this story. There
Hmm.
was a time when I was at Kane, I didn't have the money.
Mm.
But guess what? Leaders within the school saw what I was doing. And I remember constantly getting the bills from school saying, you owe this much money, you need to pay by such and such, or you're not going to be able to register. Let me tell you something. When you are operating in your purpose, the other ambassadors see you.
Mm.
And the other ambassadors who have resources will extend those resources. So let me tell you, the bills were just, they were coming. They were coming. And I was just like, I don't have it,
Mm.
right? But I was I was, my position as a student leader was second to the president.
Mm.
And I represented my university very well.
Wow.
And people who were in positions of authority, I still don't know who they are to this day,
Yeah.
but trust me, they got that bill paid. They were like, you need a Parent Plus loan. I don't, no way.
Yeah.
My parents didn't have it. Where was I going to get this from?
Yeah.
Right. And that's what I mean when I say, there's been just so many um,
Mm.
experiences like that I've had where my back was up against the wall and God broke through.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal, Allison. And I'm sitting here wondering, like, because I'm seeing all these different dots connecting, and it brings me to the question: what is your most dominant gift?
I believe my most dominant gift is yet to come.
Mm.
So in this project, the woosh effect, I believe that I am called to a space of discipleship,
Mm-hmm.
but it might not necessarily be discipleship in the way that we've been taught discipleship to be.
Mm.
I feel oftentimes, especially in the church and places of faith, God is intangible, unreachable. He is, that's what he did for David.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what he did for, Joseph. That's
Mm-hmm.
what he did for Moses. We don't put two and two together to realize that the only reason the only reason why this book exists is so that we can have a connection with him.
Mm-hmm.
And so that when he speaks, we hear his voice,
That's right.
right? So when God asks you to do the impossible, you're ready to do it, come what may.
That's right.
You see? So even looking at the story of Abraham, someone told you to go kill your son.
Yeah.
It's something that is beyond you, right? It is knowing his voice so much so to the point, if you really understood the story, Abraham had the faith to know that if he was called to do that to his son, that God would have to resurrect his son, because
Mm.
God had already promised that it was through Isaac's seed,
Yeah.
right, that the world, pretty much, that all the promises through God will be coming through Abraham's seed.
Right.
So he had to have that faith to know, well, somehow, some way, and
Right.
it was Isaac. It was not Ishmael,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we have to have the faith to know that this is not a book full of fables, right?
Right.
This is not just great nighttime stories to tell our children. This shows you who God is, and it teaches you how to understand the voice of God, and it should allow you, what it should be doing in you, and what the Holy Spirit does in you is it allows you to reflect back on your life
Mm.
and allows you to see the inner workings of God in your life, so that when you are in trouble,
Mm-hmm.
when
Yeah.
you are in a space of, you know, where you don't have the bills. I have been there when your back was up against the wall, right? I'll kind of wrap up with this story. So I'm going to grad school. This was around the 2008 mark. I used to work for a major financial firm. I gotten a couple of jobs in, and I got the job now, like the big job where I wear the suit every day when I'm going into work. I was settling trades for a major firm. It's actually known as the largest firm now for investments on the planet.
Mm.
And I got paid more money than I had ever thought. At that point, $50,000 was a lot of money to me, and I was finally in a place where I could pay my bills because I was operating in the negative with, previous employment. And then Lehman Brothers dropped. Within months of me getting hired. I started in July. Lehman Brothers, I think, fell in like September, October. And that place that was so loving and so kind and so gentle became a prison. It was the best place to work ever. They would provide you, lunch would be $2.50, and you were having a hot meal. Everything was just heavily subsidized there. It was great. They had a gym, swimming, anything that you pretty much wanted to do, they offered it. And when Lehman Brothers fell, I knew it was only a matter of time before I was brand new. When you have a new hire, there's a lot of investment going on. And, unfortunately I lost the job, and, I was doing my grad work. So I kind of picked up that load full time and just lived off of unemployment. I found a young woman who was into Wicca, by the way. That's a whole other story. And I rented a room from her, and I was going to, the local college. And my unemployment was running out. My back was up against the wall. And my pastor said at our church, the Holy Spirit is telling me that we need to have, a mode of fasting and prayer here at our church. And let me tell you something. I put everything that I had into this 40-day fast. I did not fast from food, right? But what I did do is I fasted from anything that was manipulated. So I wasn't eating anything that came out of a box. I actually realized you could eat pretty well by eating whole foods, but I took that out of a page from Daniel.
Yeah.
That, I wanted to, I cut off TV altogether. During the 40 days, I was listening to music, and I said, you know what, Lord, I feel like this music might be taking me away from you. So I cut off during the fast. Now I'm changing the way that I walk through my fast.
Right.
Because I needed this to work.
Right.
I needed God to see me. I needed him to hear me. And I prayed for three things specifically. It was a mate. It was my job situation, that I would get one. And I was praying for like my spiritual walk, that I would just be closer with him.
Yeah.
Everything from, and God was just showing me so much about myself. Even me driving in the car, I was looking at myself too much in the mirror. So then I went through that. All I was doing was just, taking the cloth. I don't know what I was looking like during the daytime, but, I for a good few weeks, I wasn't looking in the mirror. I didn't want to listen to any music. I didn't want to watch the television. I was simply in my word. Between my word and like my school studies is where my focus was. Well, earlier, in the fast, my professor had asked if anyone was interested in a consulting position. Of course, I raised my hand. And we went through the course. I didn't hear it, but because I was doing nothing more than being in my word and studying for class, I aced his class. It was a marketing class. And I'm on my knees in prayer in my room, and my phone rings. So I quiet it
Mm-hmm.
and continue my prayer. And when I pick up my phone and I listen to the voicemail, he goes, "Hi, good afternoon. My name is Joe, and I'm from this consulting firm. I was calling because we'd like to schedule an interview with you." Now, mind you, I'm going through all the paperwork I can. I don't see anything with Joe's company's name on there. I don't see anything. And I felt so embarrassed. Like I wasn't keeping track of everything that I should have. You know, when you're interviewing,
Oh
you
yeah.
keep your list of who you
Yeah.
applied to and all the things that you did.
Mm-hmm.
And I called back Joe and I said, "Joe, I just want to start off by saying I'm embarrassed because I have no recollection of applying to this firm." And he laughs at me and he says, "Are you a student at Dell State or Dell State University or the University of Delaware?" I said, "I go to Dell State." He said, "Your professor recommended you."
Wow.
Another whoosh moment.
Amazing.
Another whoosh moment in my life.
Yeah.
I knew from the time I got off the phone with that gentleman that that job was mine.
Mm.
And
Wow.
they took about, the interview process was probably about 3 or 4 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And what's so interesting is that by the time my unemployment ended,
Mm-hmm.
my new job was going to begin.
Mm.
So of
Mm.
course they extended me the offer. I happily took it.
God is good.
Um,
Wow. Wow,
words
Allison.
just can't explain when God is working for you. Like I
Yeah.
said, I was running out of unemployment. I was, on the verge of, graduating,
Yeah.
and boom,
Wow.
it happened just like that.
It's
And I was
remarkable.
so grateful for the gift. I was so grateful to be able to work. I had to get an apartment. I had to move up north. Um, at that point, my mom, she had enough to take care of herself, but she never
Mm-hmm.
really had enough to like, extend to me in that way. And she was like, "Oh, I got money."
Mm-hmm.
What? She gave
Wow.
me money, helped me out with my first apartment for that first month.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked for that firm for a couple of years, the worst 2 years of my life.
Mm.
I did consulting work, traveled, but let me tell you, he set me up with a trainer. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
When you are in a new world and
Right.
you're dealing with new things, you need a coach,
That's
someone
right.
to guide you.
So
And let me
true.
tell you something, this woman was no slack, and
Mm.
she never let anything go.
Mm.
We were doing reporting, we were doing consulting. I got into like this utility services thing,
Mm.
and I felt like this woman was miserable. Let me tell you something, she was the best gift God ever gave me.
Wow.
The best gift. The training that I got from her for those 2 years allowed me to enter into a 12-year season. This is my 12th year in business. We started in 2012, 11 years in business, and we going on strong.
Wow.
God had given me a coach in my life. And when I tell you, I felt like this woman was so miserable. Her whole life was dedicated to the cause, but that's why she's top tier. I
Mm.
didn't realize that I was working with someone who was ultimately the top in the country
Mm.
in what she does.
Mm.
And that training ultimately led me to this space of getting into consulting, acquiring customers,
Yeah.
working with them in the same utility services. I've been working in that for the last 12 years, 11 years. I guess I say 12 years because there was a time where I was doing consulting in other or for
Yeah.
other companies, but ultimately this is the space that I've been in, and it's the thing that I'm most widely known for.
Wow. Allison, there's so
So,
much I want.
so
I'm like, there's so much I want to ask you. We already covered some. I'm gonna ask you this: can we do a part two? And like, I wanna dive deep. Like, there's so many good things here, and I can't wait for my wife to hear this story, right? Because I don't know if I can say this out loud, but she has a boss that's just like what you're talking about. And she said it's like the best thing that it's the best and worst thing that ever happened to her. So it's like I'm seeing like a prophecy of what could happen for her. I believe what will happen for her by hearing your story. And I'm like, I don't want to be limited, and so I want us to, if it's okay with you, we could put a pin right here for the listeners, and then pick right back up, and we're going to go into the Etinoff Corporation and all the things that you do there, and how that training, and we talk about that trajectory, the development that was produced by you as a person, and then the distribution to build and scale and do all these great things. So how does that sound?
oh, it sounds awesome. I mean, as long as you would have me, your listeners would have
Oh,
me
of
if they're,
course.
you
Oh,
know.
I already know. Right, this is
But
because
yeah. So in the last year, and I'll just close with this for
okay,
today, and then we can
okay,
dive into the details. We have 10x.
wow,
And I believe all of this has occurred because of Bible principles that God has been showing me
mm,
in allowing us to leverage our experience and our skills and to share that widely.
mm,
It's another reason why we're getting into the woosh effect and why we're getting into coaching,
yeah,
sharing this message of deliverance, financial deliverance. Yes,
yeah,
all that is of the devil.
mm,
Anything less than top tier is of the
mm,
devil. If you are living your life and there are things around you that you see that you feel as if aren't right, don't lie to yourself
mm-hmm,
and tell yourself that you should be okay with that,
mm,
right?
mm.
What God talks about, the hand of the diligent, right?
That's
God
right.
talks about that, and not all the time it's working hard, right?
Mm,
You gotta work smart.
that's right. I love that, Allison. This is phenomenal. So, like I said, I'm literally, after we stop for today, we're gonna schedule this right away, and we're gonna get part two going. So, listeners, thank you for tuning in. Don't miss part two. We'll leave it at that. Leave it at that. So, we're not gonna say goodbye. We're just gonna say ta ta for now.